Electric fans, these are great. They come in any kind of size, and they will move air like you won't believe. 2,200 cubic feet per minute, 3,000 cubic feet per minute. Depends on how much current you want to make available to that fan to drive, but you can cool off a really big engine real quick with a couple of those. In addition to thermostatic controllers, I would recommend one that's adjustable. So a little screw slot right in here, and normally there'd be a plug over top of that. But I can turn it and decide where on the temperature gauge do I want that fan to kick on. It just is a great way to buy a little security. Also, improve the airflow through the radiator. There's a green 250 in the other room that's got all kinds of ductwork in it, all kinds of stainless ductwork. Again, the idea is just to improve the airflow through the radiator, get the heat out of the radiator. For Stag and TR7 owners, I would strongly recommend the original 6-blade water pump to a 12-blade water pump. And the idea just to move more coolant faster.
Hey Mike, is there ever an issue of possibly moving the water too fast?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Mostly I think you'd see that if you're spinning the water pump too fast, it would cause cavitation behind the pump. Because as the water moves out of the way, you create a low pressure area right behind the fan, right behind that blade, and that pressure drop actually would cause the water to boil at that moment. It would flash to steam. So you have this little air pocket right behind there. So at some point the pump would become ineffective because it's just flashing the coolant to steam as opposed to pushing the water. I would imagine that you'd have to turn the pump pretty fast to make that happen.
Doesn't the thermostat regulate that also?
No, the thermostat's job is simply to regulate the temperature of the engine, and its job is when it opens.
But the thermostat does restrict this flow.
Correct. The idea being that it won't let the engine get below a minimum temperature.
But sometimes take the thermostat out, the coolant passes through the radiator too
Correct.
quickly to lose the heat that it needs to.
But the problem is now you've let all the water flow through without any restriction, which means it's going to take forever for it to warm up. And you're going to have the drivability issues all that time. And there is really a minimum operating temperature the engine should have to run well and to run properly. If it's running too cold, especially a modern engine, effectively the engine management system will never get off the cold cycle and things will fail emissions left and right because you took the thermostat out. But the older vehicles, really, you don't want to run too cold a thermostat because the engine needs a certain amount of heat to run well.
Like generally they have like 160,
Right.
80.
Yeah, you can go down to about 160. I've never seen a thermostat colder than 160. And a lot of cars actually today like 200. Especially if you want the heater to really work well. You want a 200-degree thermostat in a car. Okay, clutches and gearboxes. The standard transmission obviously is a 4-speed stick with an optional overdrive. It's been kind of found that these boxes are a tad light for longevity. And some of these broken parts here, your teeth missing on this one. This gear is actually welded onto the main shaft. It's friction welded. I don't know what happened exactly, but those parts are basically might as well have been machined out of one billet because they're all together. This is an overdrive part with a big crack right through the middle of it. So, as you can see, the gearboxes do an okay job, but I virtually guarantee you, and I'm sure Matt could back this up, that your 4-speed is going to need a rebuild before 100,000 miles. Almost guarantee it. No matter how gentle you are with it. So it's an adequate gearbox, but I couldn't give it much more than that. In addition, the overdrives can be a little bit iffy. I don't know how many overdrives we've had. Worked great when they were cold, stopped working when they got hot. Cool off, they'd work fine again. You change the solenoid, and that would solve the problem. Or you had an issue with oil flow because they were dirty and not properly maintained. Or you couldn't bring enough current to the solenoid to get it to fire properly. Something along that line. So even the overdrives have issues. So some of the upgrades that we've seen is the fitment of a Toyota 5-speed. This guy out in California, Herman Vanderacker, does a conversion kit which puts a Toyota 5-speed pickup truck transmission and adapts it to the Triumph engine. I can tell you from personal experience, I have a 2001 Toyota pickup truck, Tacoma, with 5-speed in it. Nearly 300,000 on the clock. That gearbox shifts just as smooth today as the day they put it in. And there's no lost motion, there's no clunking, no banging, no worn bearings, no funny noises. It just works the way it's supposed to. Yes?
So how different does it feel versus the original transmission?
Uh,
Tactile sensation of the
I
gear.
think
It's
the
pretty
real,
much about the same.
you're good.
But, having driven a lot of TR6s, sometimes that stick just doesn't want to move. It feels really stiff, like they're stirring glue. The Toyota, boom, boom, nice. You push the clutch in, you push it where you want it to go, it gives you the gear you're looking for. Yes?
Yeah, Mike, I've got one in my TR6, and actually, I don't have the truck transmission in it. There's a certain range of
Yeah, there was a
cylinders in
range
there,
of
and
vehicles.
the first 4 gears are matched up virtually identical to the stock, and then you get that fifth
And then
overdrive.
fifth gear is your overdrive.
It's a great upgrade.
And you know, when you push it to 5, that gear is there.
I think that the only drawback to that to me is that you have to put a stop on the clutch because the hydraulic throwout bearing can
Yeah.
only move so
You
far.
push so far,
So,
it'll come apart.
What it does is it makes the length of the clutch half the distance. So you're used to having that long throw on the pedal, now you only have half of that throw. And sometimes, to me, I kind of like that long throw because it lets you launch at different times if you had to. But that's more of a, it launches a lot different than what you would be used to. But I guarantee, I agree with him that it's a great deal, but it's just a little different.
Yeah.
It's
So it's like
a
anything.
little different drive.
But-
Just the clutch.
Yes.
just
I
the
put
clutch.
And
I
it's a
put an
little
Eagle
wonky
Gate,
with the drive
I
shaft.
put an Eagle Gate conversion kit instead of the Herman Van Draper.
Okay.
And that still uses the
Oh, yeah.
original slave cylinder, and it still uses the pressure plate from the TR and all that stuff, just a different clutch plate.
Right.
The only modification you had to do was, it comes with its own shifter, but you had to modify the transmission tunnel by a ½ inch to the back, so you had to
Okay.
grind it out. And
Okay.
Put over.
Well, Herman's kit, you got to play around with.
you gotta play with all that stuff too, but it's a big difference.
Yeah.
Drive shaft.
And yeah,
The drive shaft doesn't
usually
get locked down.
they put a collar on the drive shaft because there's a sliding.
Or Eagle
spline joint.
Gate sells a drive shaft for like 300 and some bucks, all ready to go, You
The
don't have
collar's a little cheaper.
College cheaper, yeah.
I've made up a lot of drive shafts for that conversion too. But the best drive shaft for that is one without a slider, because the tail shaft of the transmission already has a slider in it, so you cannot have a slider, you cannot have the drive shaft sliding,
Two slides.
so you have to lock it in place. So now you've got a slider that's not being used, and it's just a place for misalignment.
Plus, there's a lot of metal up in that area that you just added, and
Right, it's best to make up a drive shaft without a slider and just go flange to flange.
that's the way I do it.
saying there's a collar,
It's actually a split collar. You clamp it around the drive shaft where it would slide on this sliding joint. So you're using a sliding joint in the tail shaft of the transmission, not the sliding joint on the drive shaft. If I had two sliding shafts together, they'd actually eventually move away and they'd drop out. No, all Herm's kid's doing is locking it in position.
Extending the drive shaft the whole way against, and then putting the lock
Yeah,
collar on
lock
to keep
it,
it there. Thing is, the only thing that's holding it from extending further is the cork seal inside that ring that screws on.
But the drive shaft's shorter, right?
Not for
No,
the,
you're
not for
changing- you
Ben
don't have to
Nacker's
change
kit.
the drive shaft.
It's the same one.
You use,
think, right?
yeah.
I would have thought you'd have to cut it.
Nope.
The transit is longer.
No, I think the trans is a little shorter, actually, it must be.
Yes.
Could you touch on the reverse lockout for an A-type overdrive? Is it necessary, recommended? I believe it's the aftermarket.
No, I can't. That's again above my pay grade, but
Well, as far as the overdrive goes, it definitely does not like to go in reverse in overdrive.
it's only made the
What's
turn
that?
one way.
There's an aftermarket, and I was wondering if that's
I'm not familiar with it. Normally, if the gearbox is set up correctly, there's no issues with the cutout switch that's originally supposed to be there.
but is that in the early A-type and the J?
Yeah, it's in all of them.
It's in all of them?
Yeah, the J doesn't like going in reverse either. So, but if everything is set up correctly, those cutout switches work fine. So there's no reason to
at another state.
Correct.
It's very easy to leave the overdrive switch on when you park it. And you go back up here.
Yes.
But the electric overdrive, the wire bus won't work in the first floor. And stuff.
We've got a Sprite out there for right now. No, I don't know if they make one for I don't know what they make. Herman Van Director, HVDA. He's out in California. Oh, is he there? Okay. All right. Also, some other things you can do to improve the transmission is to lighten the flywheel, especially the TR6 on flywheel is that big and it's that thick that part weighs a ton. You drop it on your foot, you're going to know it. So one of the things is you go to either the aluminum or just have the iron on lighten it a little bit. Usually what you're gaining there is a little better throttle response because you're not spinning that giant hunk of metal on. Gives the engine a little more pep. Also with the Triumph transmissions, at least, you can adjust the fulcrum point on the throttle pairing. If you notice there's an arm about that long with 3 holes in it. The top hole, you have the shortest lever pushing against the throttle pairing, so the clutch is the heaviest. And the bottom hole, you have the longest lever, so the clutch is quite a bit lighter. It's still kind of heavy, but it's quite a bit lighter. And even in the midpoint, still leaves you, the clutch still has a lot of weight to it, but putting it at the bottom at least will make it a little bit easier to drive. Also, there are companies, I'm sure, which can adapt an automatic transmission, but note that there's usually a slight upcharge because there's a lot of engineering work involved. But I have actually heard of it. Somebody at one time adapted a Ford 3-speed out of a Pinto to fit into an MG because the owners were getting so old. And they wanted to still enjoy their car, but they didn't want all the effort of driving it. Yes, sir.
The transmissions and overdrive, what do you recommend for communication? 330 weight, engine oil, with the overdrive?
Ask the boss. I'm not qualified in that area. Electrical issues I can tell you instantly, but some of the mechanical things, some of the detailed mechanical things will be on me. Okay, so that's about it. Rear axles. This is the typical rear axle for a TR6 or any of the independent rear suspension cars. And as you can see, I got 2 U-joints and a sliding spline in here. All these parts are prone to wear. When a U-joint starts wear, what you'll hear is a click every time you engage the clutch, especially from going from forward to reverse, or if you're a little sharp with the clutch and it hooks up real hard, you actually hear a mechanical or a metallic clicking sound. That's actually the U-joints kind of slamming into each other. It's not going to be too much longer before that click becomes a clunk, and then the bearing cups start to fall out. So that's one issue. Secondly is the sliding spline joint is prone to wear, has to be lubricated at fairly regular interval with a particular type of grease. The way you notice this is becoming an issue is you're going around a turn under power, and the 2 parts actually lock momentarily, and then when you load the tire enough, they pop, and that gives you the classic twitch as you're going around the turn. So when you feel that, you know that that's blind lock momentarily and then release suddenly. And it causes a camber change in the rear wheel, and the car does a little sidestep. Kind of hard to drive the car smoothly, but once you do that all the time.
What grease do you recommend?
There's a synthetic lube that they are offering up as a solution. I don't remember specifically what it is, but it really the factory even issued a service bulletin concerning it, so that information is available. And finally, at least as far as the TR5 and 6 are concerned, and I guess the 4A, is the differential actually hangs from the frame on 4 pins. And if the bushings start to wear out, that differential starts to move around and actually will tear the bushing apart. And now there's nothing to control the motion of that differential assembly, and you'll hear a really loud clunk every time the clutch takes up. And that's actually the differential slamming into the frame. And that's not going to last very long before you tear them out. That's a common failure. So upgrades for that. Number 1, poly bushings. They don't break, they don't tear apart. And because they lack that compliance, they'll tend to hold that differential in place much better. That eliminates the shock load, eliminates the noise, reduces possible frame damage. One of the other things that's been offered up is there are all kinds of specialist companies which sell various parts for all these cars. And one of the big upgrades in the TR6 at least is a Bmw Rear Axle that uses their differential and CV joints instead of sliding splines and U-joints. I'm sure they get a little, quite a price for that, but it does reduce all of this and uses more modern components and a much better way to do the job. Okay, fuel systems. We're all familiar with great things about Zenith and SU carburetors, but frankly, they really aren't that bad for standard street work. But their issues are, even, frankly, even our newest car is over 30 years old at this point. So the packing in the carburetor can leak, dries out, and the last thing you want is actual raw fuel puddling on the engine because you all know what happens next. And the other thing is that the moving parts in the carburetor, the spindles and the throttle plates, can wear, the bushings wear out, or they mechanically interfere with each other, and the seals can go. So what you create are air leaks, which gives you lean operation, kind of rough running, a car that's not particularly interested in running without a lot of choke on it. So those are issues with carburetors. And then I'm sure everybody has a horror story too about SU electric fuel pumps and the mechanical points that are in those. So upgrades there, I can certainly replace them with rebuilt units. Everybody likes the Weber carburetors, frankly. I've never seen one I particularly liked. But there are also, Mikuni makes basically what is a motorcycle carburetor, which works okay, but each upgrade there brings its own issues. Or there's Solex and several other different manufacturers of carburetors, so you can certainly change out carburation to something either a little more modern or a little different. It might be easier to work with. There are fuel injection kits available if you really wanted to go crazy. Moss used to sell, but from what I was researching in the last couple of weeks, I guess they discontinued it. But they sold basically a rudimentary throttle body fuel injection for the MGB. We took the single barrel Zenith carburetor off and fitted their kit, and they did it to try to get cars through emissions in California. But customers were fitting them because they said the cars drove better, they ran a little bit cooler, and they were much more tractable. So you eliminated all the issues with carburation and went to a simple fuel injection system. There are other companies that make them. Megasquirt is one, but from what I've read, they just build the controller. You've got to bring your own injection nozzles, fuel pump, and plumbing and so on to make that happen. But in the end, what you end up with is a car that's, again, a little more tractable because it's now fuel injection, not carbureted. You eliminate the hot soak issue, which is where I pull up with the Dairy Queen in a 90-degree day, I turn the engine off, and 10 minutes later I go to start it again, and there's no fuel in the carburetors because it's completely boiled out, and the engine is effectively flooded with vapor because it had to go somewhere. So those kits are great for eliminating that. And then as far as the fuel pumps are concerned, I can always go to, or you can always upgrade to a solid state control in the fuel pump. They retain their classic ticking noise, but instead of using a set of points, they use a